I think my mother did exactly the right thing. I think it's absolutely extraordinary.
Princess Anne had endured disagreements, disappointments, and decades of palace politics without allowing her emotions to break through. But this was different. When a confidential royal ranking reached her desk, the Princess Royal did not simply question it, she erupted. Camilla had been pushed ahead of her in a newly approved ceremonial order, and Anne immediately understood that the change was not merely symbolic. It was a declaration of power. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Anne stared at the sealed red folder on her desk at Gatcombe Park, the country home where she handled her royal work. She opened it slowly, expecting planning notes. Instead, she found a revised ceremonial order, meaning the official sequence deciding where senior royals stand, walk, sit, and appear during major events. Camilla's name now stood directly above hers. The change reached beyond one procession. It placed the queen consort ahead of Anne at family ceremonies, council gatherings, formal entrances, and palace occasions. It also gave Camilla influence over who would stand closest to Charles during the monarchy's most visible moments. That mattered because proximity to the sovereign signaled authority, trust, and access, not merely good seating. Anne turned the page again, hoping she had misunderstood. She had not. Her jaw tightened. Then she closed the folder with one sharp movement and demanded to know who had approved it. Decades of relentless service, thousands of engagements, and years spent defending the crown had been reduced to a line on a confidential chart. Camilla received her duplicate copy at Clarence House, the London residence shared with the king. She did not smile, yet her silence carried satisfaction. The queen consort placed the document beside her correspondence and asked whether the new order had been circulated. She understood what the ranking meant: recognition, control, and a stronger position inside Charles's court. Anne noticed something darker. The final page carried the king's approval mark, an internal symbol showing royal authority, but it held no complete signature. Someone had moved the proposal through the palace using Charles's name without revealing whether he had personally accepted every detail. The next paragraph deepened the threat. Camilla would receive priority in selected household briefings and broader influence over appointments inside royal residences. This was no longer protocol. It was a quiet redistribution of power. Anne refused to answer through secretaries. She ordered her car, took the folder, and said she would confront Charles before any announcement could be made. As she left Gatcombe, one question followed her toward London. Which family bond would break first when the palace doors closed? The palace ranking appeared to be a simple list of names, but behind those names stood two women whose relationships with the crown could not have been more different. Anne had spent her entire adult life serving, without demanding praise. Camilla had fought for acceptance after years of controversy. Now one woman saw recognition, while the other saw erasure, and King Charles was trapped between his sister's loyalty and his wife's rising authority. Anne sat rigidly during the drive to London, the red folder resting beside her like an accusation. The Princess Royal had always measured her place through duty, not ceremony. She had stood beside her mother during family crises, carried demanding engagements when others stepped back, and protected the monarchy without asking for a grander title or a better position. To her, the crown meant service before comfort. That was why the ranking cut so deeply. Camilla saw the same document differently. The queen consort believed it confirmed that she was no longer being treated as a tolerated outsider, or simply as Charles's wife. After years of public anger, guarded welcomes, and doubts about her place, she viewed the new order as recognition that her position beside the sovereign carried real authority. The crown, in her mind, was finally accepting her without hesitation. Charles read the briefing note alone at his desk. The king reached the paragraph describing his sister's fury, removed his glasses, and placed them beside the page. An aide waited nearby, but he offered no instruction. He understood Anne's loyalty, yet he also knew how fiercely Camilla feared being pushed back into uncertainty. Every answer seemed certain to wound one of them. Anne finally broke the silence inside the car. She told her private secretary that the problem was not Camilla's royal title, which identified her formal place as the monarch's wife. The danger was allowing personal closeness to become institutional authority over relatives who had served for decades. She believed affection had entered the machinery of power, and once that happened, fairness became almost impossible to defend. A palace aide then passed along a disturbing detail through a documented internal briefing. Camilla had reviewed an early version of the ranking several weeks before Anne received it. She had not merely discovered the change, she had known it was coming. William's response raised the stakes further. Prince William had not approved the proposal and feared it could weaken Catherine's future position while giving the current court influence over the next reign. The future king requested a private meeting with Charles, making it clear that this was no longer a disagreement between two women. Anne heard the news just before reaching London. Instead of feeling supported, she felt the ground shift beneath the family. Before she could confront her brother, one question became impossible to ignore. What had happened inside the palace that convinced officials Camilla should be moved ahead at all? Every palace rupture has a moment that appears insignificant, until the consequences begin. For this crisis, that moment came during a private planning meeting for a state banquet. One chair was moved, one instruction was challenged, and one decision was made while Charles remained silent. Those present would later describe it as the instant Camilla stopped behaving like a participant in royal protocol and began acting as its final authority. 6 weeks earlier, Camilla had taken control of preparations for an upcoming state banquet, while the king attended a separate briefing. A state banquet is a formal royal dinner held for an important visiting leader, and every position in its procession carries meaning. During the meeting, the queen consort studied the receiving line and ordered Anne's place moved behind two senior members of her own household. The instructions stunned the officials around the table. Anne's position had long reflected both her birth into the royal family and decades of service to the crown. Moving her behind palace employees did more than change where she would stand. It suggested that Camilla's private household now held authority over the king's sister. Anne received the altered plan later that afternoon. The Princess Royal read it once, reached for a pen, and wrote a single sentence across the page: "I will not be repositioned by household preference." She sent the document back without making a telephone call. Her restraint made the message more powerful, because everyone who knew her understood how much anger had been compressed into those few words. Camilla read the note alone in her sitting room. She folded it twice, placed it on the table, and told an aide that the monarchy could not function with separate centers of authority. The queen consort believed Anne was refusing to accept the structure of the new reign. What the princess saw as protection of duty, she interpreted as a challenge to her legitimacy. The next morning, Camilla requested a confidential meeting with the Lord Chamberlain, the senior official responsible for coordinating major ceremonial affairs within the royal household. According to a documented internal account of that meeting, she argued that the existing order created confusion whenever the king's wife and sister appeared together. She asked for a complete review. Charles saw the proposal days later. The king did not sign it, question its details, or reject its purpose. Exhausted and desperate to prevent another argument, he simply told officials to find a workable arrangement. Those 5 words became the approval they needed. Anne uncovered the final connection through the briefing papers in her red folder. The official who had moved her in the banquet line had also drafted the new ranking. This had never been a misunderstanding. It was coordinated. With the trigger exposed, Anne entered Buckingham Palace, carrying proof that the campaign began with Camilla. This time, there would be no handwritten note between them. There were no cameras, no ceremonial smiles, and no line of courtiers to soften what came next. Anne entered the private drawing room, expecting to find Charles. Instead, Camilla was waiting beside the fireplace with the revised ranking resting on a table between them. For several seconds, neither woman spoke. Then the Princess Royal closed the door herself, stepped forward, and demanded to know why her lifetime of service had become an obstacle to be moved. Anne placed the red folder on the table and asked whether Camilla had personally requested the review. The queen consort did not deny it. She said the monarchy needed clarity now that Charles's reign had entered a more demanding phase. The revised ranking, an internal order deciding where senior royals stand and who receives priority at official events, was meant to remove confusion. Anne heard something else entirely. She heard a justification for replacing earned respect with personal influence. Camilla held her ground. She argued that the sovereign's wife could not continue appearing subordinate inside the king's own household. The queen consort insisted that the change reflected office, not personal worth, and accused Anne of turning necessary structure into deliberate humiliation. To her, the ranking offered security after years of uncertainty. To the Princess Royal, It threatened the principle that service still mattered. Anne pointed toward the document. She said, authority gained through marriage could not be used to erase authority built through decades of duty. The Princess Royal reminded Camilla that she had carried the crown through family scandals, public pressure, and moments when others stepped back. Then her voice hardened. She declared that the palace was being reorganized around one woman's insecurity. Camilla's composure finally cracked. She reminded Anne that she had endured years of hostility while members of the family watched from a safe distance. The Queen Consort said she had been judged, mocked, and treated as temporary, yet she had remained beside Charles. She would not apologize now for occupying the position the king had given her. Anne noticed Camilla's hand move across a second folder. The Princess Royal asked what it contained. The Queen Consort pulled it closer and refused to answer. That single gesture confirmed the danger. The ranking was not the final change. More power was already being discussed. Charles entered through the adjoining doorway as Anne declared that their mother would never have allowed personal loyalty to rewrite the family's order. The king stopped, visibly wounded, and ordered both women to end the argument. Anne turned toward her brother. "Did you order this, or did you simply allow it?" Charles said nothing. The Princess Royal walked out, leaving his silence behind. But inside the room, Camilla kept one hand on the unopened folder, revealing that the struggle over rank was only the beginning of a far larger transfer of power. Anne's confrontation exposed the anger, but it did not expose the machinery. Behind the revised ranking stood a small circle of advisors who believed the palace needed a stronger center around Charles and Camilla. They called it stability. Anne saw it as capture. And when William was shown the second folder in a private briefing, his expression changed before he had finished the first page, because the proposal reached far beyond who walked first. 3 senior household figures had shaped the plan after Camilla's banquet request. Their aim was to pull event planning, residence access, ceremonial precedence, and internal briefings into one central system controlled by the king's immediate household. Ceremonial precedence is the official order deciding which royal receives priority at formal events, and in palace life, that order often determines who is heard first behind closed doors as well. Charles had accepted their logic because it sounded practical. The advisors warned the king that separate royal households were sending mixed instructions, creating delays, and weakening control. They presented Camilla's rise as an administrative repair rather than a personal promotion. Any objection could therefore be dismissed as resistance to efficiency, even when the real issue was power. Charles felt the cost only after Anne left. The king stood alone, picked up a framed childhood photograph of himself beside his sister, and studied it in silence. Then he placed it face down. He depended on Camilla for emotional strength, yet Anne's accusation had struck somewhere deeper. By protecting his wife from insecurity, had he allowed his sister's service to be treated as disposable? William received the second folder from a trusted courtier during a private briefing. The prince read that Camilla could gain greater control over family appearances involving younger royals. He stopped immediately and asked whether Catherine had been consulted. She had not. One page pushed even further. It proposed that events involving the Princess of Wales be coordinated through a joint palace committee chaired by Camilla until the next reign. A joint palace committee is a small decision-making group created to control planning across different royal households. William saw it not as cooperation, but as an intrusion into his family, and an attempt to shape the future monarchy before he inherited responsibility for it. The folder also revealed that Anne was not the only target. Edward and Sophie would retain public duties, but their private authority would shrink. William's household would face the same limits. Their faces would remain visible, while their decisions were quietly controlled elsewhere. William closed the folder and requested a private audience with Charles. He made one condition clear: Camilla must not attend. Minutes later, the Queen Consort learned about the meeting. She understood at once that the future king was preparing to oppose her. As William walked toward his father's study, the conflict moved beyond wounded pride and into succession. Charles now had to decide which court he was truly building. The ranking had not yet been publicly announced, but the palace was already behaving as though it were law. Invitations were altered. Briefings were redirected. Staff who once contacted Anne directly began waiting for clearance from Camilla's office. The most painful consequence came during a memorial planning session when the Princess Royal arrived to find her usual chair removed, and everyone in the room understood exactly what the empty space meant. Camilla's office had begun receiving advance copies of engagement plans involving Anne, Edward, and Sophie. Senior staff were instructed to route sensitive decisions through the Queen Consort's team to prevent what advisors called conflicting commands. An engagement plan is the official schedule explaining where a royal will go, whom they will meet, and what role they will perform. Controlling those plans meant controlling far more than diaries. It shaped visibility, access, and influence. Anne entered the memorial meeting expecting difficult questions, not a calculated insult. The session had been arranged to honor the late queen and decide how her service would be remembered at future ceremonies. The Princess Royal stopped when she saw that her chair beside Charles had been moved farther down the table. Camilla now occupied the place closest to the king. Anne did not sit. She gripped the back of the relocated chair and looked directly at her brother. The Princess Royal said she would not discuss their mother's legacy under an arrangement designed to diminish her. Charles lowered his eyes, while Camilla remained still beside him. No one challenged Anne, because everyone understood why the position mattered. She had stood beside the late monarch for decades, and removing her from that place turned remembrance into humiliation. Sophie watched Anne prepare to leave. The trusted confidant rose without making a speech, gathered her papers, and followed her toward the door. Her quiet decision carried more weight than an argument. Sophie had shown that loyalty to the Princess Royal could no longer be dismissed as private bitterness. Edward received the warning soon afterward, during a confidential conversation recorded in an internal briefing note. Prince Edward was told that openly supporting Anne could affect his access to future ceremonial responsibilities. The message was unmistakable. Royal duties were now being used to pressure family loyalty, and he understood that Sophie's decision might carry consequences for them both. Camilla remained seated after the room emptied. The Queen Consort looked toward the abandoned chair and asked an aide whether moving it had truly been necessary. Her question revealed doubt at the moment she was supposed to feel victorious. The system created in her name had become harsher than even she expected. Charles summoned Anne that evening. The king asked her to come alone, not as a royal subordinate but as his sister. She agreed on one condition: no aides and no documents. For the first time, they would face each other without protocol or Camilla between them and decide whether their family could still be repaired. When Anne entered Charles's private sitting room, there was no red folder waiting and no official behind the door. Her brother stood beside the window with 2 untouched cups of tea between them. For once, the king did not ask her to respect procedure, and the Princess Royal did not accuse him of surrendering his authority. They spoke instead about their mother, their childhood, and the painful distance that power had created between them. Charles asked Anne to sit, but she remained standing. The king finally admitted that the revised ranking had moved forward, under an instruction he gave, without understanding how widely officials would use it. He had asked them to find a workable arrangement. They had treated those words as permission to reshape ceremonial power. In palace terms, ceremonial power meant control over position, access, and influence during official royal life. Anne listened without interrupting. She knew Camilla had become the person Charles relied on most when pressure closed around him. The monarch admitted that limiting his wife's role had felt dangerous. He feared it would expose her to fresh humiliation and suggest that the family still viewed her as temporary, tolerated, and never fully secure. Anne's voice softened, but her judgment did not. She told her brother that she had no wish to stand above Camilla as a woman or wife. The wound came from something deeper. Charles had allowed guilt, affection, and protectiveness to influence the constitutional shape of the family, the formal balance of royal roles that determines who carries authority now and who inherits it later. Charles walked toward his sister and removed his glasses. The king admitted that he had confused defending Camilla with empowering her household. He said Anne should have been consulted before any document carrying his approval mark entered circulation. Then he apologized, plainly and without excuse. Anne refused to let the moment end there. The Princess Royal said a private apology meant nothing, while the altered chairs, redirected briefings, and quiet warnings remained active. Words could repair affection, but only action could repair authority. If Charles truly understood the damage, he had to reverse it. Charles opened a drawer and removed the ranking. The king tore the unsigned approval sheet in half. He announced that the proposal would be suspended and reviewed by a family council, a private decision-making meeting involving senior royals, chaired jointly by himself and William. Anne finally sat down. Charles said he would tell Camilla personally. The Princess Royal warned that the reversal would do more than disappoint her. It would force the Queen Consort to confront how far her household had acted in her name. The ranking was suspended. But beyond the palace gates, its first details had already escaped, and the private conflict was about to become a national spectacle. By sunrise, the palace's private struggle had become impossible to contain. A leaked copy of the ranking reached the press, but it was not the list itself that seized public attention. It was one photograph from the abandoned memorial meeting, Anne standing behind a displaced chair, while Charles stared down at the table, and Camilla remained seated beside him. In a single image, the entire conflict appeared to have been exposed. A national newspaper placed the photograph across its front page, beneath the headline, "The Chair That Divided the Crown." The image showed Anne gripping the chair while Sophie stood behind her, gathering her papers before following her from the room. A front-page headline is the main story displayed most prominently by a newspaper, and this one transformed a private disagreement into a public symbol of humiliation, loyalty, and royal power. A morning television presenter pushed the debate even further. During a live bulletin, she described the dispute as a struggle between authority earned through service and influence gained through closeness to the sovereign. The ranking was no longer being discussed as palace administration. It had become a national argument over what duty meant and whether decades of sacrifice could be pushed aside by personal preference. Anne watched only a few seconds of the coverage at Gatcombe. The Princess Royal switched off the television when the broadcaster mentioned her mother's memorial meeting. She felt relief that the ranking had been suspended, but that relief was buried beneath anger. A gathering intended to protect the late Queen's legacy had become public entertainment, and Anne believed the leak had dishonored the very woman everyone claimed to defend. Camilla faced a different kind of pain. The Queen Consort left Clarence House for an engagement and found the gathered crowd unusually quiet. One woman called Anne's name as she approached the car. Camilla paused, lowered her head, and continued without answering. For the first time, the recognition she had wanted felt less like acceptance and more like isolation. William's household demanded clarity. The prince's advisors prepared a statement confirming that the plan had been withdrawn, while Camilla's team drafted language describing it as a harmless administrative review. Charles rejected both versions. The king understood that careful wording would only deepen suspicion. Charles authorized a direct announcement instead. The proposed ranking would not be implemented, and future ceremonial arrangements would respect established family roles and individual service. The policy battle was over, but the emotional damage remained. Charles summoned Anne and Camilla for one final private meeting. The nation had received its answer, yet inside the palace, the two women would now face each other without rankings, advisors, or victory to hide behind. The final meeting did not begin with an apology. It began with the sound of Charles placing the abandoned ranking on the table between his wife and his sister. The document that had threatened to divide the royal family now looked strangely small. Anne sat with her hands folded. Camilla avoided her gaze, and the king, no longer protected by advisors, told them both that the monarchy could not survive if personal reassurance was allowed to become institutional power. Charles confirmed that the revised ranking had been permanently withdrawn. The king made it clear that Anne would keep her established ceremonial position, while Camilla's authority would remain tied to her role as queen consort. That title identifies the monarch's wife, but it does not grant control over the separate households or duties of other senior royals. The distinction mattered because the crisis had begun when personal influence was allowed to cross into family governance. Charles then established a new boundary. Any future change affecting a senior royal would require review by the monarch, William, and the person directly involved. No advisor could again treat an informal remark as approval for a major structural decision. The king understood that vague words had nearly broken his family, and he refused to let the same mistake happen twice. Camilla finally raised her eyes. The queen consort admitted during that private conversation that she had supported the review because she feared being treated as secondary forever. She had wanted security, recognition, and proof that her place beside Charles could no longer be questioned. Yet she also accepted that her fear had allowed others to diminish Anne in ways she should have stopped. Anne did not offer instant forgiveness. The Princess Royal told Camilla that acceptance could never be created by moving another woman's chair. Respect demanded limits, and dignity could not be built by taking it from someone else. Still, she made one promise. She would not answer humiliation with humiliation. Charles ordered Anne's chair returned to its original place for the rescheduled memorial meeting. When the family gathered again, Camilla waited until the Princess Royal had taken her seat before sitting beside the king. William watched closely. The prince understood that the crisis had created a stronger line between family affection and royal authority. Catherine, Sophie, and Edward joined the meeting without protest, confirming that the immediate division had ended. Anne had not defeated Camilla, and Camilla had not been stripped of dignity. The true defeat belonged to the belief that closeness to the sovereign could outweigh duty, experience, and earned respect. Charles preserved his marriage while restoring his sister's place. The ranking disappeared into the palace archives, but its lesson remained clear. The crown is strongest when power accepts limits, and duty prevents personal ambition from rewriting the family itself. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.